Yo, welcome back to Ken's TV, where we like to keep it real. Truth is the truth, so we call a spade a spade. So with that being said, I want to get into something tonight, dealing with the legal system. I see a lot of videos on here to where guys is on here and they explaining how it is in prison. Um, and a lot of the stories that they're telling are very horrific stories. Not saying that they're not true, because I'm sure that a lot of those stories are true. I have some stories that I'll eventually get into. But what I want to touch upon tonight, if you will, I want to kind of get into what happens before you arrive to prison. You know what I mean? As far as like how the system does you. Um, so it's interesting because a lot of people don't really know this. If you don't have a criminal record or you've never really been arrested, you really don't know exactly how the system works. Now, the situation that I'm gonna speak upon today, well tonight rather, um, unfortunately at the time, I was being a knucklehead and I was locked up in the county jail. Um, I was fighting a case. I had an ongoing case at the time, so I was going back and forth to the county jail, the courthouse from the county jail rather. So one particular day, we was in the courtroom. We was in the bullpen. Basically, a bullpen is like a holding cell, holding area where they hold you at, and then when they call your name, you walk through this door and you're magically in the courtroom. You know what I mean? So we was in the bullpen, and it's real, real loud in the bullpen. Now, here in Kentucky, Fayette County, where we're at, you don't get to speak to your lawyer directly. Now, every once in a while, the lawyer will come into the bullpen, but most of the attorneys, they're going to talk to you through the glass window. You know how in the movies they got the glass and they pick up the phone? Well, where we're at, they don't have a phone. So they have like a little speaker and you got to kind of talk in the corner. Like, yeah, okay, what did the prosecutor say? Well, that's how you literally have to talk to your attorney. So it's kind of loud and it gets a little difficult to hear. Well, this particular time, it may have been 18, 20, 21 people in there. But as time goes on, they call your name. You go out, you see the judge. And then when you come back in, eventually they lead you to a different part or a different cell. So there was a guy one time and, his lawyer, it's not like you were meddling, but you could hear the lawyer clearly talking to him because at this point, there was only maybe 5 or 6 other people in there. I was still waiting to go to court to be seen by the judge. So he's going back and forth with his lawyer. So his lawyer tells him, listen, they got you charged with trafficking, a controlled substance, and possession of a controlled substance. The same thing, but they charge you with 2 different crimes. Possession and trafficking. Now, a lot of times what the system does, they'll overcharge you. You know what I mean? So a lot of times in this particular case, let's just say you got a small amount of drugs on you. Well, instead of just charging you with what it really should be is a simple possession, they'll say, oh, well, you were trafficking it. A little small amount. So now you're sitting in jail with your bond between $25,000 and $50,000 for a very, very small amount of drugs, just because they want to say that you're trafficking the drugs. You know what I mean? So he's explaining to his attorney's saying, listen, if you take 6 months today, I can get him to amend this down to a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it's going upstairs. Now, going upstairs means, for the people that's never been in the legal system, it means you're going to get waived to the grand jury and you're going to get indicted. And once you get indicted, that's just basically another way of saying we're proceeding on with the felony case. But if you take the 6 months today, we'll amend the charges down to a misdemeanor. You do 6 months in jail, and then you're finished. Now, at this particular time, the guy had only been in jail for maybe, I'm not going to say only, he'd been in jail for 14 days already. So he's telling the attorney, the legal aid, because that's what it was, the legal aid. He never even met the legal aid before, a day in his life. Court-appointed attorney came in there. He had never seen the guy a day in his life. He comes in there and he tells him, listen, I'd advise you to take the 6 months. That way you won't have a felony on your record. Well, the guy's insisting, like, they weren't real drugs. You know, they were aspirin crushed up in my pocket. They were aspirin. So the prosecutor's like, or the legal aid rather, he's like, okay, well, give me just a second. So he takes his little, manila envelope and goes back and talks to the prosecutor. Maybe about 10 minutes later, he comes back. He says, listen, the prosecutor said we can knock this down to 90 days. You serve 90 days. You get credit for the 14 days you've already been in. So that means you serve another 76 days. So the guy's adamant. Those were not drugs. So he goes back in. Legal aid goes back in, talks to the prosecutor again. Maybe 3 or 4 different times. And every time he comes back with a different offer. So finally it got all the way down to 30 days. Take it or leave it deal. Listen, they're going to offer you 30 days. I strongly suggest that you take this. Otherwise, once you get indicted and it gets waived to the grand jury, you're going to sit in jail fighting just the whole process. You might sit in jail for something like that, 7, 8 months, additional months, just fighting it. Going back and forth, arguing, going back to court, fighting it. So, once again, he turns it down. So finally, the legal aid goes in and he comes back. He said, listen, normally the prosecutor doesn't do this, but she's in a good mood today. She said she'll give you time served. If you take the conviction, she'll give you time served. So he was like, you mean I can leave today? She was like, yeah. Well, he was like, yeah, you can leave today. If you plead guilty today to the misdemeanor count, whatever they amended it to, I forget what the actual charge was, you can leave today. So the guy's sitting around and you can see he's contemplating because, he wants to go home to his family. He wants to be home. And jail is some of the worst conditions, especially that county jail. And like I said, we'll talk about that on a later video. So the guy, he's sitting there and he tells the legal aid, he said, I'll tell you what, man. Bring me back the reporter where they tested the so-called drugs. So, the legal aid, he's kind of being resistant because, this is your client. So you're supposed to technically do what your client asks. So he's like, I don't think we want to play with her today, man. She offered you time served. You can go home today. Why you want to press her buttons? The guy's like, listen, you're not the one sitting in here. He said, and I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, they were aspirin. So the legal aid goes back out. He comes back and he's like, well, they can't find the report. Now all of a sudden, she can't find the prosecutor. She can't find the test results. So they can't find the test results. So the guy's standing on his, 10 toes. He was like, I tell you what, man. Tell them they can go on and waive it to the grand jury. I'm not taking nothing. I'm not taking nothing because those were aspirin. She know that they were aspirin. And she's trying to make me plead after something that I haven't done. Just to get some sort of a conviction. Okay. Legal aid goes back in there. Now I'm still in there waiting to go, to court. See the judge. Man, it ain't about 10 minutes later. He comes back in and says, I got good news for you, Mr. Such and Such. The prosecution has agreed to dismiss the charges. So when you go back in front of the judge, they're going to recommend that the charges be dismissed and you get to go home today. Now, that's just a small example. That's just a small example of how the system really, really works. The guy was locked up. He didn't have any money to hire a real attorney. So if he wasn't insistent, he would have ended up doing, I would say, at least 90 days, 90 to 180 days, just for the simple fact that he knew that he couldn't really fight the system because he didn't have an attorney. So he was about to plead guilty. Even though he had been pleading guilty to a misdemeanor, he still was about to plead guilty to something that he didn't even do. And a lot of times, man, people are so quick to judge you when they look at your criminal record, and a lot of them charges that they charge you with are bogus, man. They overcharge you. They'll overcharge you for anything. And when you take your mug shot and they look on there and you might have 7, 8 different charges that basically just arrived from one charge. Like I said, he had a simple possession charge, but not only did they charge him with possession, they charged him with trafficking a controlled substance. So it means he's sitting in jail for some aspirin. If you're looking at it logically, or truthfully rather, he's sitting in jail for some aspirin with a $25,000 bond. They knew that it was just aspirin, that it wasn't a real controlled substance. But a lot of these prosecutors, man, they're overzealous. They don't care anything about you, your family, or anything. You know what they want to do is get a conviction. That's all that matters to them, is a conviction. You know, when you got these guys coming out of jail, man, and you see guys that do 15 and 20 years and then they get out, a lot of times, man, you have to sign a piece of paper stating, I will not attempt to sue you all. You know, we made a mistake, but they're not going to publicly come out and say it. Guess what they're going to say? The system isn't perfect. You know, and that's the unfortunate part about it. That's what they're going to say. Those prosecutors, man, they overzealous. They have no conscience. Only thing they care about is locking people up, getting convictions so they can move to the next level. Whether they're trying to be a judge or, I don't know, you know, wherever they want their career to go. So I just wanted to, like I said, give people a little insight of how things go and let you know, don't look down on people that have a criminal record. Especially, you know, a lot of times, man, even when that charge gets dismissed, such as the gentleman that I'm speaking of, it still shows up on his record as an arrest for trafficking and an arrest for possession of a controlled substance. But it just has dismissed beside it. That alone will stop you from getting a job, even though it says dismissed. They don't go in there and just take it off your record. Nah, you have to go get a lawyer, which costs money. Lawyers are not cheap. Then you got to go in and file and go before a judge and try to have that expunged and removed. Like, it's definitely steps, and it's a process to it. You know, so a lot of these guys, man, you know, you come back out and it's hard to get a job. They don't want to hire you because they're looking at your criminal record. And most of the time, I'm not saying that people are 100% innocent. I'm definitely not saying that. But what I am saying is that a lot of times people really get overcharged with something. They'll know, okay, he did this, but let's charge him with this. You know what I mean? So in his particular case, we're going to charge him with trafficking, which carries 5 to 10, just so that we can say on down the line, after he's been locked up 6, 7, 8 months, we'll cut you a deal today, Mr. Such and Such. Instead of trafficking where you're facing 5 to 10, and we're not even talking about the sentence enhancements. That's like if you have priors, now they enhance your sentence. We're not even talking about that. So if you're facing 5 to 10, and for trafficking, they'll say, well, if you go ahead and take this 3 years today for possession, then we'll give you 3 years today, and you may get it probated. And you sitting there like 3 years, but it sounds better than 5 to 10. And like I said, if you already have a prior record or prior history, once they hit you with that sentence enhancement, say you facing 5 to 10, now you may be facing 10 to 20 over something that simple. Now, you know that they were just aspirin, but you can't take a chance of going to trial. Because if you go to trial, if it's a similar crime as you already been convicted of, they're going to charge you with, they have a thing here in Kentucky called 404B, I believe that's what it's called, prior bad acts. So they can bring up your whole past, your whole history, your whole arrest record, even if the case has been dismissed. So now the jury sees all of that. So they looking at you like, he got to be guilty. So that's the games that the prosecution plays, especially when they know you don't have the money to fight it. So the basis of me making this video is just to give people a little insight exactly how the system works, because it is a system.